Hello, welcome to another edition of On the Spot with My Astro Chris, and I'm Chris Taylor of My Astro Chris, here with you again to go over someone's chart and give them an idea of what's going on in their life a little bit from an astrological perspective. And this is something that you can take advantage of as well, and you can find details if you want a chance to be put on the spot yourself, either at my website, my main website at www.myastrocris.com. You can find this full blog post at my blog as well. It's www.blogspot, or I should say myastrocris.blogspot.com. Or you can find it on my YouTube channel. You can just search on YouTube for My Astro Chris, and you'll find the channel including these videos. So in any case, what we have this time around, we're dealing with a 57-year-old female, someone who I know nothing about. And what I'm going to do is just do a really brief overview of a glimpse of her kind of personality structure relative to astrology, and then we'll get right into what's going on now for her. And we're going to keep this as brief as we can. And so just starting out, the chart from my blog, or if you're on the Spot section of my website, you can see the chart up above. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, there should be a link that you can click on that'll take you right to my blog so that you can have the chart with this video as well. And in any case, if you look up at that chart, how this works is that circle represents the picture of what the sky was like when she was born. That thick horizontal line there in the middle, that is the horizon. So this is, for example, she was born at night, so the sun is below the horizon, which you would expect. And so all the planets below that horizon line were literally below the horizon itself for that particular time period. So she was born in January of 1953, and so this is the picture of that moment. And on the very left-hand side, if you look at the left-hand side, which would be that side of the chart, where that horizontal line begins, that sign symbol that is hovering over that point is what's known as the rising sign. So we're all familiar with our sun signs, where the sun was when we were born. Just by knowing what month you're born in and what day will give you your sun sign. But in terms of what sign was rising on the horizon at your birth, that's really a lot to do with what time of day you were born. Okay, and so at the time of day she was born, for this particular date of the year, the sign of Scorpio was on the rise. Scorpio rising has certain characteristics associated with it. Okay, and these are very different from her sun sign characteristics. Her sun sign is actually in Aquarius. So born in late January, that's an Aquarian sun. But this rising sign of Scorpio adds a layer of protection that hides that Aquarian sun a little bit. And so we'll talk about that right now. And so with Scorpio on the rise, first of all, the rising sign represents how we protect ourselves. That first layer of protection, that how we come across when people first meet us. It's how we think we're supposed to be to survive, how we think we're supposed to be accepted. It's all subjective. There's no objective reality to this, but everyone has a certain way they assume or have learned to be in front of people when they first meet them, etc. And in this case, we have someone who was taught to be, or who perceived that they had to be, like a Scorpio, okay? And Scorpio energy is very intense, very emotional. It's also very seductive, okay? So here's someone with an Aquarian sun, which we'll get to in a second. An Aquarius sun is someone who is detached and intellectual, more mental realm of being. Scorpio is very, very, very different from Aquarius in that it's more emotional, more attached. It's hard to detach with Scorpio. So here's someone who's going to give the impression, anyway, of being much more attached to things, to people, and to ideas than maybe she actually is. This Aquarius is a very open-minded and willing sign to see things from a new angle. Okay, where Scorpio likes things the way they know them to be, and it's hard to kind of tear things away from a Scorpio. So someone with Scorpio on the rise is going to really give the impression that they're intense, really give the impression that they have something to defend in some way. Whereas an Aquarius is much more lighthearted in that sense. So this is our first line of defense. The next layer of defense that's kind of protecting that true inner layer that's more represented by the sun, that second line of defense then is the moon sign. And so the sign that the moon is in this case, is in the sign of Gemini. And Gemini is an air sign. It's very mental, very flexible, etc. Very, very different from Scorpio, but not too different from Aquarius. So we have someone with this middle layer of protection that more so resembles their true sun sign energy, and is very different from that first layer. So here's someone that when you first meet them, very intense, very emotional, very attached to things, etc. And then you get her in a situation where she's vulnerable and she's kind of off center. Um, and this is when that moon sign can come out. This is when that last line of defense can come out, where you're really unconsciously reacting. And the unconscious reactive patterns of Gemini, that Gemini pattern of unconscious reaction, is a lot of detachment, a lot of flitting about, and flakiness almost. Where Scorpio is very, very in it to the end, going down with the ship type of an energy that she'll present off the bat. Gemini is more or less, take things as they come, easy go, easy come, easy go. And so here's someone that when the going gets tough, suddenly becomes a little less detached. And it can surprise people that assumed she was the Scorpio energy that they were presented with, to find this person that's a lot more lighthearted and a lot less attached to certain things. And if someone could actually get through those two layers, those two very different layers of this individual, then they'd actually be able to find potentially that true sun energy, which is in this case Aquarian energy. And Aquarian energy is similar to Gemini in that it is intellectual and mental in that whole realm. It's slightly more evolved than Gemini energy in that it's more about bigger ideas, bigger mental realm and society in term, and Gemini is more of relating on a one-to-one basis, more like individual relations, whereas Aquarius is more of the societal relations. So there is some differences in terms of how that mental energy is expressed, but in any case, we have someone with a lot of mental energy protecting themselves with this layer of emotional protection for whatever reason that she thought it fit in her life. So that's the basic big three of her chart. That's the rising sign, the moon, and then the sun. The big three. If people knew their big three, there'd be a lot more in-depth of a description for individuals with respect to just looking at a sun sign description, just those 12 signs, and picking up what that describes about you in general. And in my opinion, doesn't really do too much justice. But when we bring the big three in, it starts to really add some dynamics to those layers. There's a lot more going on in the chart, as you can see. There's more than just that sun, moon, and rising sign. And if you're wondering, the sun is actually located in the third house, which would be kind of bottom left here, and the moon is located in the upper right part of the chart. So upper right, it looks like a little crescent. So that's where these planets are actually located in her chart. And when we look at all these configurations going on, all those lines, those colored lines, those are really the aspects between the planets. It's sort of like the dialogue between the different components of our personality. And in some cases with the red lines, those are challenging dialogue, meaning there's some kind of bridging a gap between two pieces of ourselves. The bluer lines are more ease of interaction between two different parts of ourselves. And when we look at this chart, one thing that really jumps out at me and that I'll concentrate on, especially with respect to what's going on now, where the planets are relative to the inner planets here, is this one configuration. If you look at the chart, you see those two green lines, and they kind of they meet on the bottom right, and then they kind of open up toward the upper left, and then they're kind of met with a blue line that joins them together. So that triangle there, the two green lines and the blue line, that configuration is what's known as a yod, Y-O-D, yod. And those green lines represent a quincux, which is a 150-degree aspect, and then that blue line is a 60-degree aspect, or a sextile. So 60 plus 150 plus 150 adds up to 360. So it's representing the whole circle, and those are the pieces. And when we have a configuration in a yod, traditional astrology will tell us that it's also nicknamed the finger of God, whether you're religious or not. But this is a configuration that when you see it in a chart, it represents some sort of defined plan, of almost like a destiny in some ways. Not everyone has this, but there is this configuration here, which suggests there is some sense that at some point in this person's life, the energies that are represented in this configuration will come forth in some